I think people like to do business with people that they know, people that they trust. And in a world that is increasingly automated, I buy from people that I know and trust. People buy from me when they know and trust me. Giving advice to somebody that says, how do I build out a network if I can't go to Stanford or Berkeley or Harvard or wherever? First place I'd go is LinkedIn. The advice I give to people that are looking for co-founders is one of the things that aligned us was we were all pretty focused and dedicated to it for the most part. And that's one of the biggest things. You want to find people that are like-minded in that respect, but you need diversity in the skills. When you have a million things to do, you want everyone to just swarm on those things without running into each other. Founders should do everything and anything where the highs are insanely high, the highest highs you'll ever feel, and the lows are the lowest lows you'll ever feel. Because everything feels personal. When somebody says no, it's because you failed. You as a founder, you didn't do something. And then everyone's complaining because of your incidents and you just want to shut it down. That's really, really hard. So how do you deal with that? To be a solo founder means that you need to manage those ebbs and flows of the highs and lows. On the days when you don't want to get out of bed because everything sucks, you need to force yourself to get out of bed. On those really hard days when you feel like everything's going to go to zero.
Hi, welcome to the third part of Mike's journey. Here you'll get to know how he built his network and how it helped him to make his startup big.
Can you tell about why network is important for you? Where all in your journey does it end up helping you? And if somebody doesn't have access to colleges like Stanford, how can he build his network?
Yeah, great question. So my history was I was a mechanical engineer working in a large company that was working on manufacturing, a lot of different consumer goods. And so for me, when I thought about where I needed to go or be in order to get into tech, get into software, I knew that it was going to be a lot harder to try to do it on my own. And so for me, that was kind of the priority, because network ends up being the thing that helps you meet the people that maybe eventually become your colleagues or your co-founders or can introduce you to somebody. Maybe they become future investors or know somebody that can be an investor. And so when I think, today about even today at this point, having a more established network, I still try to spend a good amount of time every week, maybe 5% of my time, up to 10%, networking with people that maybe if you were just looking at it from an ROI perspective, in the short term, you might say that's not necessarily worth it, right? But I think what comes from that is long-term relationships that maybe 2, 3, 5 years down the road might end up helping one or the other, right? And when it comes to networking, a lot of it's just, casual, get to know each other and help out where I can. I really try to help out, make introductions, whatever it is. Even doing something like this, doing in the middle of the day can be challenging, but it's worth it, right? Because we get to build a relationship, and who knows, maybe 2 years down the road, I can help you with something, you can help me with something. And so I think I try to take the long view on that, because at the end of the day, I think relationships end up really driving a lot of the things in the world. And it's interesting because right now we're going through a really transformational shift with AI becoming top of mind for a lot of people and automating a lot of things that historically, maybe were done manually by people. And when I think about what the outcome of that is, I think one potential outcome is that relationships become increasingly important, right? In a world in which sales outbounding and marketing copy and all these other things can be automated, where one of the differentiators can come in through relationships and network, right? I think there's other ways to also differentiate, but I think people like to do business with people that they know, people that they trust. And in a world that is increasingly automated, it can be hard to differentiate between all the different options and content and solutions out there. And I think you've probably seen it. I know I've seen it. I buy from people that I know and trust. People buy from me when they know and trust me. And so that's a big thing. So why the network? I think all of that. That's the big thing. In terms of how do you establish a network, I think there's a few different ways. So for me, I knew I wanted to be in Silicon Valley because I knew that was where tech was happening in 2011, 2012, when I originally moved here. I was going to end up here regardless. If I had to move and with no other opportunity other than just moving and living in my car, I would have done that. But I tried to use doing an MBA as a opportunity to do that. And so I applied to Stanford. If I didn't get into Stanford, I was going to apply to Berkeley. If I couldn't get into Berkeley, then I was probably just going to move regardless. You don't have to do that. You don't have to get into a school. You don't have to even go to school. I think there's other ways, especially nowadays, to build networks. And so one of the ways in which I see a lot of people doing an effective job building networks is through places like LinkedIn and Twitter and YouTube and all that sort of stuff. But LinkedIn is a really, I think, largely untapped opportunity for networking, especially in a more remote world where people are distributed. It used to be you want to be in Silicon Valley because that's where a lot of people are. And there's still a lot of people in Silicon Valley, but people are more distributed. And so it's less about the in-person events that you would go to and more about the kind of like online interactions and community building that you can form. And so for me, LinkedIn is, a way to engage with people's posts, comments, even reach out to people, but also create your own content. So that's a nice way to kind of get a conversation going. When you create content consistently and people engage with you on that content, then that's a nice way. And there's been a number of amazing people that I've met and connected with purely just through LinkedIn. I've really built out a good network just from that. So for me, or when I think about giving advice to somebody that says, how do I build out a network if I can't go to Stanford or Berkeley or Harvard or wherever, first place I'd go is LinkedIn. Because I think that's going to be the concentration of like-minded people that are in your industry. You can engage with them. You can post content that they engage with. So lots of opportunity there.
Yeah, that's great. I think, I also reached out to you on LinkedIn. However, we knew each other like before that. So yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk about a little bit about how did you start with the branch journey? I think you touched upon it in our last conversation, but can you, the kind of insights you saw and who all started, like your co-founders, like you started building on that, right? So can you talk about how did you choose your co-founders? What are the properties that you should see, like for any person who is thinking of starting out? What are the properties they should see in their co-founders, both from a competency standpoint, also from from a hard skills, as well as some kind of like vision or those kind of things. Can you touch upon these topics?
Yeah. So I'll give you the very short version on how we started as a company with Branch. We actually, Mata, Alex, and I got together about a year and a half before we started Branch to work on a different project, which ended up being Fitbit for dogs. And we got together because Alex was in EE, I was in Mechie, Mata was design and computer engineering. And we kind of had like that combined skill set to build Fitbit for dogs, essentially. We worked on that for 3 months, decided that wasn't the big opportunity, decided to pivot into making a mobile app. We worked on that mobile app for a year. During that year, we struggled to grow and realized all the challenges with mobile in the ecosystem in 2013. And then a year into it, decided to pivot and try to solve those problems around mobile linking and mobile measurement and a few other things and mobile discoverability. And so we kind of pivoted our way into Branch over 3 different projects or companies. But I think the reason we got together in the first place, or some of the reasons we got together, and the advice I give to people that are looking for co-founders is, first, we all were dedicated and really focused on starting a company. And we knew that because at Stanford, there's a broader entrepreneur club, which had like 200 people in it. But then there was a smaller group that got together and met kind of on a weekly basis I think on a Tuesday evening. And everyone would come in, you pitch, you just share your ideas of what you're working on. And that was anywhere between 10, maybe 15 people would show up. And so there was like the big group of people that were casually interested in entrepreneurship. And then there was the core group of people that were like consistently showing up and working on things. And I remember Alex had worked with a couple other people on, I think, a startup weekend thing that, and they came and pitched that. They shared that. He shared a couple other things he was working on. I shared, a couple things that I was thinking about. And I think what we really identified was that we were all serious about it. Right. I'd gone to business school and with the concept or with the idea that I was going to start a business and I wanted to do something. Right. And Mata had a similar idea. Alex was definitely focused and dedicated to that. And so when this project came up to work on Fitbit for dogs, there was kind of like one of the things that aligned us was we were all pretty focused and dedicated to it for the most part. And that's one of the biggest things. You want to find people that are like-minded in that respect. Right. People that they have the same mission to some degree, right? Because if you have one person that is like really focused on building a long-term sustainable business, wants to build something really big, and somebody else that's like casually playing around with it, but isn't really in it and is probably going to go get a job, or, doesn't want to quit their job to work on this thing full time. And you've got one founder working on it full time, one founder working on it part time on the weekends. That's probably not going to work. Right. And so finding people that are like-minded and that have similar ambitions. Now, if two people are both working full-time jobs and doing it on the weekend, that's fine. If both people are doing the startup full-time, that's also fine. But if you have an imbalance because you have a misalignment of how dedicated you are to it, that's where you start to run into issues. The second thing is diverse skills. And you don't necessarily need to have all the skills to build a successful, meaning like you don't need to have a sales leader and a engineering leader and a back-end person and whatever, but you need diversity in the skills, because if you're all the same, what will naturally happen is everyone will gravitate towards doing the similar things, right? And so, and even with this, my new company, it's amazing because we've got one person that's more data and product driven, one person that's more engineering driven, one person that's more marketing driven, and me, and I'm a little bit more maybe sales driven, right? And operationally focused. And that combination means that like me and my co-founder are not trying to do the same thing, right? And so when you have a million things to do, you want everyone to just swarm on those things without running into each other. And that was one of the best things that we had, right? Like at Branch, it was Alex was, learning how to code mobile apps and mobile SDKs. Mata really cared about design and marketing. I cared, well, in the beginning, it was more hardware and operations, and then it turned into operations and then sales. And we just kind of all had our own respective areas. And then Dimitri, who came later and ended up working on with Kindred and then eventually Branch, he was heavily focused on the back end. And so it was amazing. We had those diverse skill sets. So that's the second thing, just kind of having diverse skills and making sure you're not starting companies with people that have the same interests and the same skill sets as you. The final thing is core values. What are your core values? And you want to have alignment on core values. So diversity of skills, but alignment on core values. And what that means is, do you think the same when it comes to work-life balance? Do you think the same when it comes to focus, when it comes to hours, when it comes to ethics, whatever it is, right? If you have one person that's like, hey, I want a nice work-life balance. I don't really want to work more than 8 hours a day or 5 days a week. And I want to give 10% of our, revenue away every year to nonprofits. And their co-founder is like, I want to work 100 hours a week. We should work 6 days a week, maybe 7. And we just shouldn't give any money to nonprofits because we're a startup ourselves losing money. And we should, those are two very different approaches. And if you're not aligned on those core values, you're going to struggle, because you're going to have one person that's leaving at 5 p.m., the other person that's staying till 10 p.m. And that's just going to build kind of discontent.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Diversity in competencies and similarity in the approach they want to take, right? Can you touch upon in the initial days, if you are hiring the initial team, for example, right? What are the things that you need to see in them, and what are the things that the co-founders should do themselves and the things that they should delegate?
In the initial days? Okay. Let me start with the last part. What should the founders do? And then what should they delegate? Founders should do everything and anything, and they should do it until the point where there's enough of that thing where you can go hire a specialist that can fill their time doing that thing, right? And I'll give you an example, right? Early stage, 10 people, 5 people, whatever. Govin, whoever, we're doing office management, right? We receive packages, we do the mail, we make the coffee, we clean the dishes, we take out the trash, right? You might think as a founder, you should just hire that. But what am I going to do? Am I going to hire an office manager to work 5 hours a week because there's only an hour a day of those types of things? No, that doesn't make sense. So you're doing everything. Now, when you get to the point where there's an opportunity cost, or where the opportunity cost is much higher than hiring it out, that's when you should consider hiring it out. But you need to strike the balance of, is there enough of this work to fill a full-time position, right? The same thing with sales, right? If I'm doing outbounding and doing the initial sales calls in the beginning, I need to do all of it. I need to take the inbounds, do the outbounds, do the calls, manage customers, close deals, everything. Because if I try to hire a salesperson too early, they're going to be sitting there twiddling their thumbs because we don't have enough leads and we don't have enough product to be able to even outbound and sell people. Because if you outbound and you do a call and they're like, well, this, the product isn't built out enough to sell it. So you're doing it all. But then you get to a point where you're like, holy crap, we're getting so many leads. I don't even have time to like, this is where we're at with the new business. I don't have time to outbound. Okay, that's a problem. If I don't even have time, if I'm working 12 hours, 14, 15 hours, 16-hour days some days, and 6 days a week, maybe 7 days a week, and I don't have time to outbound, then time to hire somebody to help outbound, right? Like, so that's, but up until now, I was doing outbounding as well. And so that's kind of the point at which it flips. It's like, okay, opportunity cost, and is there enough of that role to hire somebody? Or are you just like, are you so busy that you're not even doing things? Another example would be like accounts payable, right? In the beginning, you as the founder, you're doing everything. You're doing accounts payable, accounts receivable. You are collecting, you're asking, sending invoices, asking people to pay you. When you get to the point that you're so busy that you're not even sending invoices to customers, and therefore you're not getting paid just because you're just like, I don't have time to like send invoices, that's a good sign that you should hire that out, right? And in the beginning, you're probably going to start with a generalist, right? Like, because in the beginning, it's not a full-time position for accounts receivable or accounts payable or accounting or office management. It's just like, I need one person to do these 20 different things, generally across all things operations. And then you hire that person. And then over time, you specialize. You're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to hire a finance-focused operations person. And this one person is going to be focused on finance stuff. This other person is going to be focused on employee stuff, HR, onboarding, recruiting, whatever, right? And then you break those down over time where those become specialists, right? That HR onboarding person will then you eventually have a recruiting person and then a recruiting team. You eventually have an onboarding person. You eventually have an HR person. You eventually have a comp person. And so it all just kind of like starts to flow down from there. So as a founder, you're doing everything. Then you start to hire like one generalist, and then it breaks down into specialization more and more and more and more and more as you grow.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Was there a time in Branch's journey that you thought that it will go down to zero? And at that time, how did you and your team manage it in terms of mindset as well as tackle the situation?
Yeah. Great question. So probably every other day in the first year, probably every other day, we thought it was going to go to zero. And then on the opposite days, we thought it was going to be the biggest thing ever, right? This is the dichotomy of startups, of being a founder, where the highs are insanely high, the highest highs you'll ever feel. And the lows are the lowest lows you'll ever feel, because everything feels personal. Every loss, every downtime, every issue, every bug, every no, it all feels personal. It all feels like a personal attack on you, rather than when you work for somebody, it's just kind of like, okay, well, there's always somebody else to blame. It's like, well, this person didn't sign, customer chose a competitor. Well, that's because our product isn't as good or whatever, right? There's always somebody else to blame when you're an employee, but when you're a founder, there's no one else to blame but you. When somebody says no, it's because you failed. You as a founder, you didn't do something, right? And that's really hard. And you can deal with it a little bit here or there, but like when you wake up and you have 3 major incidents in a day, you lose a customer, two prospects say no, and then everyone's complaining because of your incidents and you just want to shut it down. That's really, really hard. So how do you deal with that? So I think there's a couple different things. I think first and foremost, for me at least, having co-founders was huge. I like envy and am impressed by and inspired by people that can be solo founders, because to be a solo founder means that you need to manage those ebbs and flows of the highs and lows yourself. On the days when you don't want to get out of bed because everything sucks, you need to force yourself. And so what I found is, and you're the only person you let down if you the only thing to do is just get up. Versus like on the days that I don't want to get out of bed because everything sucks, I'm like, but I got to get out of bed and go to the office because people are depending on me and people are expecting me to be there, right? I've got co-founders, we've got employees. And so solo co-founders, I am insanely inspired and impressed by them because that is incredibly hard to do. So for me, having co-founders, if you don't have co-founders, a good support system, a spouse, a partner, family, whatever it is, other founders, networking groups, like having that support system is for most people like a must. The second thing is that on those really hard days, when you feel like everything is going to go to zero, the biggest thing that I found is just go through the motions, just do the thing, even if it's not your 100%, because usually it turns around really quickly. That day where even in the morning when you think everything is going to go to zero and you're just like, screw it, we should shut this thing down. By the afternoon, you might be riding high. You might get a customer that signs a contract. You might get 3 inbound leads. You might, whatever, have an amazing conversation with an investor, whatever it is. And so what I found is in those lowest moments, the only thing to do is just get up and just do something. If it'll feel like you're going through the motions, that's okay, because you're still making forward progress. It's kind of like if you do endurance sports, if you run marathons, whatever, like the key thing is to just never stop, because as long as you're moving forward, even if you're walking, that you're still making progress, right? And then you'll get to an aid station, you'll get hydrated, and then you'll get a second wind, and then you'll be able to run again. You'll get inspired. But like if you stop moving in a marathon, that's like the kiss of death. And I think it's the same thing in startups, right? Like you're going to have bad days, you're going to go through low periods, you're not always going to be running fast, but just keep that forward movement. Get out of bed, just do the thing. If you do that, it'll turn around and you'll get that second wind. And I think that's been my biggest learning over the last few years.
Cool. Yeah, I think this conversation has been super candid, and thanks for doing this, Mike. Like I think we touched upon a few good things, and it's been really nice talking to you, man.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions. Really enjoyed our conversation, and look forward to seeing you.
I hope you liked the final episode of Mike's journey, and if you did, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel.